Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1007, 1007, January the 7th, 2020, Tuesday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, we have a lot to cover today, so let's get right to it. So it looks like Josh Hawley, Senator Josh Hawley, has followed through on his promise to introduce a resolution in the Senate to allow the dismissal of impeachment in the Senate. And the way that I read his draft, and it looks like what they're saying is that once the House has formally voted for impeachment, they have 25 days to send over the documents, the articles of impeachment, and whatever else they need to do to get their managers or whatever is irrelevant. All they care about in the Senate is that they must receive the articles within 25 days, and if they do not, then they can have a vote in the Senate, and a simple majority will be able to vote to dismiss the charges for impeachment. And it looks like there were about 20 Republican co-sponsors here, including some of them that surprised me. So I am not sure if this is actually, and it doesn't say in the article whether this is actually the case. I haven't heard McConnell comment on it, and he ultimately would be the final decision maker on this, I assume. I don't know if they actually have, I'm not sure if they have to have a vote on a rule change. I think that the Senate Majority Leader might be able to institute the rule change through a committee. It doesn't have to go to the full Senate for a vote, but through the committee, I think, is how they can do a rule change, which of course they control the votes on the committee. And I assume that would be the Judicial Committee, which is Lindsey Graham, who also supports this. So I'm not 100% sure if this means that this is now the new rule, or if this is just a proposal to introduce this rule and that it still has to be voted on. The story doesn't say. So anyway, we do know that Josh Hawley did introduce this resolution. He's got a lot of support for it, and it is a rule change. So a rule change, I am not sure how that breaks down or how that works, but I'm sure in the next probably couple of days we will find out. And I believe that they are counting, according to Ted Cruz, who was commenting on this. He said that as far as they're concerned, day one was 3 days ago, which is when Nancy Pelosi was informed that they were going to introduce this resolution. And they advised her they considered day one to have been this past Friday. So, yeah, we will see where this goes. But I think that this is an interesting play. And it's something that you wouldn't expect that would have to happen. But then again, you wouldn't expect someone like Madam Botox to play such a silly game with something so serious as impeachment. But this is badly backfiring. I think there's two things going on here. Madam Botox knows that it's going to be tremendously embarrassing if they go forward with the process, because the second article, obstructing Congress, is a joke. I mean, that will be thrown out immediately. It's not even legitimate. And abuse of power, there's no, yeah, you can claim abuse of power, but there's no crime. They name no crime. So that would not go over very well. Even some Democrats, even we're hearing that Kirsten Sinema is even suggesting that the same thing, that she's still waiting to see the crime, right? So you could actually end up with every Republican and probably a handful of Democrats. I mean, it could be very embarrassing, and I think that this is what Pelosi is worried about, because remember, there are Democrats running in 2020 to hold on to their seats, who they're in some pretty tight races as well. And you can't be seen as voting for something that's so badly flawed and partisan. And so I think it's a very good strategy. But there's a second thing going on, which is that the Penguin, Nadler, has been trying to get the Mueller grand jury information and the trick and the tactic that they've been trying to use, because they were rejected once before, but now they're saying that they need it for the Senate for the impeachment trial. The problem is is that the impeachment trial was held in the Senate. And it's not the Senate that's requesting it. It is the House. And the Senate really can't request it. Well, won't request it because that would be controlled by McConnell. Now, if Schumer were the Senate Majority Leader, yes, he would be the one doing it. But that's the problem that Pelosi has, is that she can't get that done through the Senate. It has to be done through the House. But the House has already voted for the impeachment, and now it's on to the Senate. And so it looks like this issue with getting the Mueller grand jury testimony is still in the courts. And that is why they're trying to drag it out, because they're hoping that they'll win the court decision and get the Mueller grand jury testimony. And within the Mueller grand jury testimony are little bombs planted by the lawfare group on behalf of the Democrats for impeachment, so that it can be exploited to try to allege more crimes or any crimes. So this is kind of the dynamic that's going on. The Republicans are quite aware of this, by the way. Again, Ted Cruz even mentioned this in his interview on Fox. So they understand the game that's being played here. And this is why Hawley is introduced this to try to, nip this thing in the bud. So we'll continue to follow the story and see where this turns out, how it turns out. Did anybody see that pic, or the pics, I should say, of Epstein, the close-up of Epstein and his neck, and also the photo, another photo they show of the inside of his jail cell? Because if you look at the photo of his neck, you can clearly see it doesn't look like a sheet would have caused that mark that he has around his neck. It almost looks like there was something used to strangle him. I'm not a doctor or anything like that, so I don't know. But there's a lot of people looking at it who are doctors, and they're looking at it and saying, it doesn't look like a sheet, something a sheet would cause. It looks more like something that, like like an electrical cord. And guess what you see in the pictures of Jeffrey Epstein's cell? 2 electrical cords. Why in the world would you leave 2 electrical cords in the cell of someone who just 2 weeks prior was supposedly going to commit suicide? And a person who you know is probably on suicide watch, and a person who you know has a lot of people who would like to kill him. Why would you leave a murder weapon, a potential murder weapon, in the cell with him? Electrical cord. And that's exactly what it looks like. It looks like something like a rope, a cord, or something, left these marks. Also, you can see where there's blood around his neck. But if you look at the thing laying on the floor, the sheet that supposedly was used to strangle himself, you don't see any blood on it. And according to this doctor who was on Fox, they didn't pick up any traces of blood, and that's very unusual as well. So there's some this thing is this thing is not over. There's a lot of questions that still need to be asked, and I know that there's an investigation by the DOJ, but as I've said before, I don't think we'll ever get to the truth about this, because I think that when you dig into Epstein or his friend, this Maxwell woman, you're going to get into a lot of areas where no one wants to go. Republicans, Democrats, the DOJ, the FBI, nobody. Because it gets into things which can, at some point, get the title of national security. In other words, it involves Epstein probably being involved with intelligence agencies, doing a lot of dirty stuff, and they will always slap the national security label on that, and that's how they put it to bed. And I think that's eventually where this is going to go, is that people are going to keep asking questions, and we're eventually going to get there. And eventually, they're going to have to come out and say, well, this involves national security, and then that's when everyone will know that it involved intelligence agencies. That's when everyone will know the truth. That's how they shut it down. That's where we're eventually going to get to if they keep digging into Epstein. And these pics don't look good. Don't look good. electrical cords in his cell. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Oh my God. Well, it appears to a lot of people, as we're looking at how the things are playing out with Iran, it looks like, to me, and this is my opinion, again, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but just common sense, it appears to me that, I don't know that Trump lured the Iranians into a trap, but he's kind of got them in a trap now, because after the death of Soleimani, they raised the red flag, which means their flag of war. They've made all these threats, now threats against Trump properties around the world, against, all sorts of U.S. Assets and things and such, all over the region, including in the United States. So now they've actually put themselves in a position where where all the supporters of the Shiite Muslim world, supporters of Iran, are now expecting some really big response from the Iranians. And if they don't do something that's a really big or strong response, they are going to look very, very weak, which is the worst thing that could possibly happen to the Iranians. They cannot afford to look weak. On the other hand, if they do take some sort of retaliatory action, Trump's going to hit them back twice as hard, 10 times as hard. Whatever they try to do, he can do about 10 times worse, easily, and he will. So it appears to me that the Iranians are in one hell of a trap here, because, again, they can either look weak or they can do something and they're going to get pounded, and they're still going to look weak. It looks to me like a lose-lose situation for the Iranians and a big win for Trump, but we'll keep watching. Yeah, so listening to Styx Hexenhammer this morning on one of his segments, and he brought up something which I think is very, very... now, I think he's kind of joking, but I think he's also being half serious. What we were talking about this the other day, if you look at the Democratic field, there's no one that's able to pull away. And it looks as though you're not going to have, coming out of the primaries up until Super Tuesday, you're still not going to have a clear winner. And, of course, as you know, I believe that you're going to go into the convention without a clear front runner, and you're going to get a brokered convention and all the things that go along with that, which typically is disaster. It's really the last thing that the Democrats want, because they will literally be on the big stage for a week, and all the cameras and all eyes will be focused on them for a week. And what are we all going to see? We are going to see the sausage making process at the Democratic National Committee, where you're going to have the far left and the, I guess, so-called centrist or moderates. This will all play out on TV during convention week, where they simply are not going to be able to get along. Let's put it that way. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be really ugly, and I don't see anything heading that off. But Styx was talking about a possible compromise that could come out of this. And I think that, even though I think he's partially joking, I think there is something to be said for what he was saying might happen. And what he's suggesting is that you may end up with a compromise in order to pacify the far left and those opposed to the far left in the Democratic Party. They may have to put together a compromise ticket where you might see someone like a Biden with Bernie Sanders. Commie Bernie and Joe Biden. Could you imagine something like that? It's hard in a way because they would be so far apart. But it may be how things turn out, because you are going to have this big split. It's going to rip the party apart, and they're going to have to find some way to compromise and bring this. And again, this can't be done behind closed doors. The Democratic National Convention is a televised event 5 nights a week. It's a major televised event. You're not going to be able to, pull the curtain back and have this fight quietly behind closed doors. This is going to be in front of God and everyone. And so they're going to have to come up with some sort of a plan. And while this is a little bit crazy on its face, and you say, no, there's no way, you can't have a Biden and a Sanders on the same ticket. It doesn't work. But I'll tell you what, can you think of anything else? Because when I sit here and think about it, there's going to have to be some sort of a compromise at the convention. It's likely going to be brokered. And I know the Right Reverend Clinton has worked every angle possible to try to get in there. But I just think, even though she's going to work the electors and work the delegates and the super delegates, her people will be working that angle. But I just believe at this point, most of the Democrats, certainly those on the far left, and even a lot now in the center or even the center right, if there is a center right in the Democratic Party, they just are done with the rotten Reverend Clinton. They're done with her. She may think that she can pull this off, but I don't think she will be able to do it. She could be badly embarrassed in an effort to do so. And I just don't think it's going to work. I think she's going to make every possible effort, but I just don't think she's going to get it done. And therefore, you're going to end up with our default position, which is Biden, and then you're going to have the crazies on the far left, which is everybody else. You might have a sane person, somewhat sane, like Buttigieg, but he's I just don't see it happening for him. But yeah, it's a it's a silly notion on its face to think about a Biden-Sanders ticket. But when you look at the situation, can you think of anything else that can you think of anything else that will suffice? You can't put two far lefties like a Bernie and Warren, because you literally lose all the money, the big donors. You lose the corporate Democrats. You lose too much. If you go with Biden, and anyone close to him is trying to play a centrist, maybe a Buttigieg or something like that, you completely lose the far left, which is where all the energy is in the party. It's 30-40% of the party. So they're so divided that, there's not really a, it's not like the far left and the people on the so-called right of the Democratic Party have people that they would prefer, but they'll be willing to fall in line to get to rally round the best person. I don't think that that's the case that we have here. I think the far left of the Democratic Party is not interested in compromise. I think that they'll walk away, and they'll do it in an ugly, ugly way. They will make a scene. They will make a spectacle of the situation. And that's what I expect to see, a really ugly spectacle. And one thing that might be able to, preempt that is if they do a compromise and put like a Biden Bernie. I just don't know how you sell those two guys, or how whether or not you could get them together to compromise. I mean, there's just such a divide. But unless something happens, that's what you're going to end up with. And the only person I see as a wild card that's out there, well, you really have two. You have Michelle Obama and Hillary. But Michelle Obama clearly has no interest. The Rotten Reverend obviously has a lot of interest. She would love to be written in. If there's no clear winner, she gets written in at a broker convention. But I just don't think that she is popular enough, and certainly she won't have any support from the far left. She will be in the same position as Biden, essentially. And she may have less appeal to the centrists than even Biden himself, simply because of what happened in 2016. And she's so unpopular. Her negatives are really high. So it's going to be crazy for the Democratic convention. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a riot. May literally be a riot. And I think that all those sticks was kind of joking. I'm not so sure. You might see something really crazy, like a wild compromise, like a Biden-Sanders. That would be an interesting ticket, and I would have a lot of fun with that. Well, most of you know that I've been talking for quite a few months now about the fact that, Uncle Bob the Executioner, special counsel, when he was special counsel along with Wiseass and the whole Hillary donor posse, they are, like I said in yesterday's video, they are part of the coup. And I've been talking about this now for a couple of months since, the IG report came out, even before that probably. But now we have Margot Cleveland in the Federalist writing a fantastic story on this, where she says that the IG report shows that the special counsel replicated the FBI abuses. Including, and she goes through like a dozen things, including continuing to share or show false information to the FISA court. Remember, the fourth FISA occurred when Uncle Bob was in charge. Remember, Uncle Bob took over Crossfire Hurricane. He inherited Crossfire Hurricane. His investigation, the special counsel investigation, was the handing off from the FBI to special counsel Mueller of Crossfire Hurricane, which he knew on day one when he took over that the Steele dossier was had been proven completely untrue, that the FISAs on Carter Page were based on fiction, that there were actual lies and things done to fool the FISA court. Mueller, Uncle Bob the Executioner, knew every bit of that and continued on. And this article by Margot Cleveland, I mean, I'm kind of taking the sort of non-lawyerly way of looking at it, but she's a lawyer, and she specifically goes through the legal sort of descriptions of what Uncle Bob the Executioner and the Hillary donor posse team did once they took over the investigation. And she basically says, but in a more lawyerly way, and she gets much more specific, much more detail as to, in general, what I've been saying. So you might want to take a look at that Margot Cleveland article. And as I said before, Durham is eventually going to arrive at this conclusion. And he's going to go over to Attorney General Barr and say, I got a problem. I got a couple problems. I need to talk to Obama. That's the first problem I got. The second problem I got is I think Uncle Bob the Executioner, Mueller, was part of the coup. Man, oh man. Let's see. Let's see what happens. The Rotten Reverend Clinton's book, Gutsy Women, has now been moved into the loss leader section of the bookstores. They are now willing to lose money to get rid of the copies that they printed because they just haven't been selling very well. So due to poor sales, the book by the Rotten Reverend Clinton, Gutsy Women's, now a loss leader. They're losing money on the book just to get rid of the ones they already printed. She's still out there on her tour selling and pushing this book, but it's not going very well for the Rotten Reverend Clinton. Then we have Burisma Joe out there again. I mean, it's just you know, there's no end to it. I mean, the man is clearly demented, and he should be sealing his own political fate every time he opens his mouth. But the problem is that everyone around him is so bad that he's able to continue. This is the only explanation I can think of. So he's at one of his little campaign events, and some young kid, says to Biden, he's reading obviously a question to Biden, and he says, my dad was told that Obamacare would lower his interest and lower his premiums, and he could still keep his doctor and blah 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 blah, and that turned out not to be true. And so Biden's response to that is basically say, yeah, that's true. They said you could keep your doctor, and it turns out you couldn't, and no one really knew what was in it. And he says, and the big problem is no one understood Obamacare. So here you have Burisma Joe out there trashing Obamacare when in fact he was the vice president that was out there pushing it. Literally, he was out there pushing Obamacare, and now he's trashing Obamacare. I mean, maybe when he has a moment of sanity and clarity, he'll realize, oh God, did I just trash Obamacare? Uh-oh, was I vice president then? Yeah, I was. I was vice president then. Oh my goodness. Uh-oh. Don't worry, MSNBC will clean it up for me. Well, we have the wild-eyed commie, Ocasio-Cortez, coming out and saying that she and Biden would not be in the same party in another country. You see, that's what I was just talking about a few minutes ago about the DNC convention. This is what you're going to get. These people are literally, might as well be in two different parties. You have a socialist/communist party, and then you have a sort of neoliberal party. And the two are oil and water. Just watch how that mixes come convention time. I'm telling you, it's going to be hilarious. Of course, John Radcliffe on Sunday morning with Maria Bartiromo telling us what we've already discussed here quite a few times, and what he's already mentioned a couple times, which is that Comey and Brennan gave conflicting testimony about the Steele dossier. And what they're talking about, what he's talking about is the difference of opinion of whether or not the dossier information should have been included in the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment. But I think what's beautiful about this, and the reason I'm coming back to it, is that we just learned about 2 weeks ago that Mike Rogers is now cooperating and working with Durham. And of course, we know that about a week after those hearings, where Brennan and Clapper and Comey and Rogers were called in to testify, and they were asked questions about the ICA and all this kind of stuff, we know that Mike Rogers didn't side with Clapper, Brennan, and Comey as far as his confidence in the information in the ICA. And he's talking about the Steele dossier. But we also found out that a week after the hearings that Rogers sent a classified letter to the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee where he informed them that, hey, I just want to let you know for future reference, these discussions about what was in the ICA and the dossier material, whatever, I have nothing to do with that, anything else. But what's most important is that he was in those meetings. So Durham doesn't have to try to decide whether it was Comey or Brennan who are lying or both, because Mike Rogers was in those meetings and he wasn't going along with the stuff. And so he'll be able to tell Durham exactly who was fighting to get it into the ICA and who was not. And I think what we're going to find out is they both were trying to get it into the ICA, even though both wanted to deny it publicly. But I think that they both were on board. That's what I think we're going to find. And Mike Rogers can tell Durham all about it. We don't need to trust Brennan or Comey or question him about it. In fact, when Durham questions him about it, he's already going to know the answer because Rogers will have already told him. In fact, Rogers, very likely, if he had a staffer with him, probably has notes. Probably has written transcript notes from the meeting. We're also learning that Victoria Nuland is going to have a lot of questions to answer because apparently she did something at the time that they were getting Steele's material and they were trying to pump it through the State Department. She was getting concerned about things and such, about what they were doing. And so what she came up with was a plan whereby they would use Jonathan Weiner and they would have him send the Steele information to the State Department from his personal email rather than his official State Department email. And he would send the email to a State Department contractor, a third party, who would then strip the identifying information from the header on the email and from the documents, and then send them to the State Department's classified system. And this apparently was Nuland's idea. That's Victoria F. the EU Nuland. Uh-oh. That looks kind of shady, don't you think? And isn't that exactly what the Rotten Reverend Clinton was doing on her private email server? Having them strip the identifying markers off the headers on the emails? I believe so. Well, wonder where Nuland got the idea. New poll shows that Donald Trump Jr. is leading Republicans who are asked who they would like to see in 2024, and it is Don Trump Jr. Oh my goodness. We also have George Papadopoulos. As you know, he's running for Congress out in California, and he's doing pretty well. I mean, I didn't think he had a very good shot at first. You have like 4 or 5 different people, a couple of them fairly high profile, including the former Republican congressman who held the seat. They're all in the game, but Papadopoulos is doing pretty well. He had a campaign rally in California in his district over the weekend. He had 2,500 people show up. He had 2,500 people. Not even Burisma Joe. Well, Burisma Joe's lucky to get 50 people. and he's in a primary for the presidency, for the nomination. Papadopoulos is just running for Congress. He's got 2,500 people. Now, probably half of them came to see his wife, but but still, I mean, he's a good, solid candidate. I mean, he's a smart guy, and his name is out there, and he's a very personable type of person. I watched a little bit of one of his speeches, and he doesn't give like fire-breathing speeches or anything. He kind of talks, normally. He's not a professional campaigner, professional politician, but he comes off as honest and smart. And he has, good conservative ideas. And he supports Trump, obviously, 100%. So, very well done. Keep your eye on Papadopoulos. And if you're in California, in his district, go vote for him. Or give him a shot. At least listen to what he has to say. I now want to go back to a October 2017 article in the Washington Times, an article which I got quite a few good quotes because it was a direct interview with the Washington Times and Stephen Rowe, who of course is Mifsud's friend and lawyer at that time anyway. And now that we're almost 2.5 years removed from there, I want to go back and revisit just a couple of things because now they're a lot more significant than they were 2.5 years ago, based on everything that we know now. So let's just go back and revisit a couple things that Stephen Rowe, in a personal interview with the Washington Times, and I forget which reporter it was, but I can't remember his name, but he's been around forever, pretty seasoned reporter, is doing a personal interview with Stephen Rowe back in October of 2017. And let's go back and revisit just a few things. There's much more in this article, but I want to hit just a few of these things. Stephen Rowe, back then, told the Washington Times that Mifsud was a Western intelligence operative who fed what he knew to retired officials. Rowe says that the LCILP, the London Center for International Law Practice, which is now defunct, was not real. He said that it was a cover for intelligence agents. And now, this has been pretty much confirmed. Rowe said that Mifsud was an employee and a missionary of Clintonian and U.S. Democrats and Democrat institutions and a close cooperator and an asset of Western intelligence services. And keep in mind, Stephen Rowe, gave John Durham a recording of this interview he did with Mifsud back in 2017, as well as a transcript. He provided Durham with that information just this past summer, 2019, just a few months back. So keep those things in mind. We also have former FBI Principal Deputy General Counsel Trish Anderson saying that she had the responsibility to sign off on all FISA applications for final approval. But she says that the Carter Page FISA followed an unusual process. She said the normal checks and balances were skipped. Trish Anderson says that Andy McCabe and Silly Sally Yates bypassed her and signed it themselves before she and the FBI legal department had done their analysis on the Carter Page FISA. That sounds like bad news for Silly Sally and Andy McCabe. Look for one of those two, if not both of those two, to turn state's evidence against the coup plotters, of which they were a part. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. See ya. Bye.